Hello, everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic, and welcome back to the Good Morning Asgard edition of the Welcome to Asgard podcast. This is episode 503 of the Welcome to Asgard podcast, where today we're going to be talking about the Acolyte. Oh boy, the Acolyte episode 3, which just got released last night. It has caused quite a stir on social media, quite a stir across the board, across all various platforms, all different places. So I'll give my own initial thoughts on the show. I'll give my own initial thoughts on the atrocity that is the Leslie Headland era of Star Wars, and how last night's episode truly does, in many ways, destroy the entire legacy of Star Wars by playing around with what the Force actually is. And just when you thought midichlorians were cringe, just wait until we start talking about the thread of the Acolyte. Oh boy. We'll also be talking about Season 4 of Babylon 5. As you all know, last summer, I was able to start watching Babylon 5, was not able to finish it, but got all the way up into some of the beginning episodes of Season 4. Since that time, and since the beginning of summer has started, I have been able to finish Season 4 and just started actually Season 5 last night into this morning. And oh boy, let's say I got a lot of thoughts about the transition between Season 4 and Season 5, and apparently it is one of criticism that is shared by many, but there are a lot of really, really good things in Season 4 in general. I very much enjoyed it. I will say, though, I think that as it got towards the middle section, especially after the Shadow War is essentially done, it kind of reaches a very... reaches a very weird lull in the middle. So we'll talk about Season 4, some of my favorite episodes, some of my least favorite episodes, things like that, and also any of the other things that y'all want to talk about on this morning edition of the show. And before we go any further, please make sure you smash that like button, light up that fire button over on Odyssey, smash the Rumble button as well. We are indeed live on Rumble this morning. Was able to fix that. So if you're watching us on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, make your presence known. We are also live streaming on Twitter as well, which should be live, which should also be working this morning. Let me go ahead and see if I can get that opened up. It looks like it is indeed working, and I will pop out that chat, so that way if anyone is commenting over there, that should hopefully pop up in my chat platform. But while we wait for people to jump in, let us say hello to the people in the chat first. We got Scott McKenzie saying, good morning, y'all. Good morning to you, Scott McKenzie. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Ambrose Chamberpot, who's a member, saying, hi, I love the brand new intro. throwing a little bit of shade at Father Christopher Miller. Hail to you, Father, who last night showed he had not been around in a while because he was like, oh, this is a new intro. I'm like, yeah, it's been the intro for months now, but okay, bud. Hail to Father. Prince Screen says, can't stay, but thought I'd come by and tell everyone hi. Well, hello, Prince Screen. Thank you very much for stopping by today. I definitely appreciate that. Drop the like. Brian Kadershow, what's going on, Brian? Welcome back. Hail to you. Scott McKenzie saying, hail to the chat. Forever Sci-Fi, who's a member, saying, good morning to you. The Morak tagging, saying, good morning, I'm so sad at what has become of Star Wars. Yeah, absolutely. I've been watching a couple of different reactions to it. So far, one of my favorites has been Drunk 3PO. Shout out to Jay. He had a really good coverage of this, to the point where he talks about how even Forbes, even the person writing the review for Forbes.com, says this is the worst episode of Star Wars that has ever been produced. For a mainstream publication like Forbes to have someone coming out that clearly about this episode, especially with many of the implications of this episode, especially it coming out during the month of June, which the secular world uses to celebrate the sin of pride. Yeah, let's just say there is a lot of heat that can come your way by being critical of really anything to do with this show, especially during this month. So for a mainstream critic, or at least a critic on a mainstream site, to call it the worst episode in history, one, it is correct. I think that one could easily argue this is, if not the worst, one of the worst episodes of Star Wars that's ever been done. But it's also one that is well worthy of criticism. And the criticism is well warranted. And that's something I feel that a lot of people are just not being very honest about. There were already people before the episode aired saying you're going to have a lot of people who are going to be crying and moaning about this episode because they just don't like people because of its certain persuade. It's like, no, it's objectively bad. It's okay to like objectively bad things, but please don't try to argue and don't try to make the point and try to create something that is not there. Much like Leslie Headland trying to create a story that just is not there. Because this story is just garbage, as one could say. We got Vermithor. What's going on, Vermithor? Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Vermithor, thank you for the $2 super chat. Vermithor saying, "Hail, brother, Disney truly is evil." Yes, indeed. Absolutely. Absolutely, especially with many of the implications from this show. Right? That these witches that the show is now dealing with can create life. Comments like, "I carried the children." Well, I created the children in this essentially witch lesbian sex cult. There's really no other better way of describing what they are, but that's exactly what those witches are. And some of the morality and some of the choices that they are making and the way in which they're being presented, it's very confusing. And that's, I think, the biggest criticism that one can have of this show, because we can go after, right? Oh my gosh, they're creating life between two women. Again, that stuff that's been talked about a lot. We'll obviously touch upon that because there's some problems there, obviously, especially from a moral perspective. But the bigger issue to me is the fact that the writing is so inconsistent and is so poorly done. It doesn't make any sense. And before anyone says, well, you haven't watched the entire show, so you got to wait for them to explain it. It's like, no. The writing does not make sense, even within itself, even in self-contained episodes. The writing is clearly either lazy or just downright bad. It's kind of amazing that the person who is the showrunner for this, Leslie Headland, apparently wrote a show that people gave positive praise to. Because I'm not seeing any sense of competent writing being done in this show. Not to mention the lack of direction. I feel really bad, honestly, for the young actresses that they have playing the twins, right? So the twins, Osha, which again, terrible name with the fact that we have literally an organization in the United States called OSHA. I mean, again, just not a very good, I think, to have that. But Osha and May, you have these two different actresses playing them. They're supposed to be identical twins, by the way, which is why the same actress, Amanda, plays both the characters, but then they decide to cast two different girls to play the twins. And I understand that, but they're also clearly not identical because you can tell, okay, yeah, I could see how they look like they're related, but they're not identical. And yet, how are they not identical when they're kids and now they're identical? Did they just not have the ability to get identical twins? Because if the argument is, well, these women, these young actresses were chosen for their acting prowess, I'm sorry, but no. And I feel bad for them. And I'm going to not really go after them as much as I'm going to go after the directors, because whoever directed this episode and whoever is the overarching director is not doing a good job, is not bringing out the best, is not giving these young women any future hope, I think, to really do anything within this industry. Now, that's probably a good thing. Obviously, it being Hollywood that it might be trying to break into, but this honestly has Jake Lloyd vibes. And we all know, right, some of the horrendous things that happened in reaction to Jake Lloyd, which is why I'm not going to be going after the young girls. But I will be going after the director, okay? Because to not only have lines written for them that are awful, what did you do? What did you do? What did you do? Literally just back and forth. But then also, to every moment that they're fighting on screen, to think to yourself, these young actresses don't even look like they even have siblings. It was as if they've never been in a sibling fight before. You're like, wait a minute, what are they doing? That's not how siblings fight. It seems so fake and so staged. And so I go back to it saying, man, the writing and the direction on all of these episodes, but this one more so especially. And if you're going to have an episode too, and this goes back to Leslie Headland. If you're going to have an episode focused on the origin of and the early development of these girls, and like how the tension between them came about, right? This event that happens between them with the death of their family and the Jedi and all these things, you better have, and if you're going to have the entire episode focused just on them as young girls, you better have your ducks in a row. You better have 2 actresses that can carry that episode, but more importantly, or at the very least, you need to have a director that can bring out a good, competent performance from those actresses. Because clearly the director they had was not an actress-director. Because it's not just them, it's every single character in this episode. But they're the focal point. And so therefore they're going to get most of the criticism. And I'm so sad that they are in this episode, because I think that they're going to probably get a lot more hate than they could ever deserve, because they're children. And I don't like when people go after kids, and that's why I'm trying to focus more so on the writing, the words that they had to say, which was really bad, and then the direction they were given, which clearly lacked direction. Anyway, let's see, SLID. I don't know why it showed up that way, but thank you very much for the $10 donation via Streamlabs, circumventing the YouTube ain't getting none of that. Thank you for the $10 donation, saying, Hail Odin. Thank you very much, SLID. I appreciate you. Let's see, Keely Chow saying, hey, everybody, good morning. Good morning to you. Saying, what's going on? What's going on? Laura, the Modern Major General says, gotta go to work, but episode 3 of Acolyte was so cringy. Everybody making force babies, I guess. Pretty much. They've opened up that world, right? Now, in the show, the argument could be, well, they do say it's a miracle that the children were conceived. I would agree with that, right? Because it's not a possibility outside of that. But the fact that they have opened that up now raises that question of, okay, so why hasn't this happened before? Why is it taken to this point for this now to be a thing? And even when you do try to go down that road, you're like, it still doesn't make any darn sense. It still does not work. It still denies biological realities. Just making up force powers. But this is Disney Star Wars. They're just constantly making up force powers. Or now thread powers, I guess now is the new understanding of it, right? Because at least from the witch's perspective, they call it the thread. Mike Jackson, what's up? Hail Odin, I'll chat. Wrenches and wenches. Oh, boy. Kelly Chow, everyone's doing okay. Feeling a lot better this morning. Both the Lady Freya and myself. Kids are doing fine, too. Let's see. Akuris, what's going on? Ikuris. It was incredibly boring. Absolutely. Scott McCann says, a late delivery from Avalon with Michael York from season 3. One of my favorite Babylon 5 episodes. Ah, yes. It's been a while since I've seen that one, but Michael York is a treasure. So pretty much anything with him is going to be pretty good, at least his part of it. Wiz UK, what's going on? Hello from the UK. Laura says, the worst line was, some call it the Force. Why are you trying to rename the Force? Yeah, exactly. Leslie Headland, why are you trying to now change what the Force is? It's not even that they're trying to change the name of it. They're trying to change everything about it. Every aspect of the Force is trying to be changed. And it's not like they're doing it in a competent way either. You have 40 plus years of story, 40 plus years of source material of what the Force is and is not. Okay? So to come in now and say, oh, well, turns out that really isn't what the Force is. All right? The Force is actually something different, and your understanding of the Force isn't really true. It's ridiculous. If you expect fans, because remember, this is supposed to be a Star Wars show. And as a Star Wars show, therefore, it should theoretically be made for Star Wars fans. But if you want Star Wars fans to be invested in your show, if you want Star Wars fans to actually be happy with your show, to actually want to watch your show, to support your show, you got to tell Star Wars stories. So if you're going to take a key element, right, one of the most key elements of the entire Star Wars universe, which is the Force, and try to change it, good luck trying to keep people onto your show. Good luck trying to keep people invested in your universe. It would be like saying, hey, since we're talking about Babylon 5 this morning, let's have a season of Babylon 5 without Babylon 5. Or let's have a season of Babylon 5, but instead, Babylon 5 isn't actually this space station, it's actually this ship all the way on the other side of the galaxy. Wait, what? Excuse me? That's not Babylon 5. Oh, but your understanding of Babylon 5 just been mistaken. Okay. Because the real Babylon 5 is actually just this spaceship over here. All the way yonder. That's essentially what they're doing now. They're like saying, oh yeah, well you think the Force is this. Well, the Force is actually this thing way over here instead. That doesn't get me started with the whole moon dance. Oh my gosh. I know Gary Nadrotic, shout out to him. He shared out a clip of this very thing. One of the most cringe moments in the entire show, in the entire existence of Star Wars. I would say more cringe than the holiday special. I'll go that far to say. More cringe than the holiday special. Because at least the holiday special is funny. At least the holiday special makes me laugh. This was like, oh my gosh, I'm uncomfortable watching it. When I said earlier that this was essentially the witches themselves being established as this lesbian Seth death cult, everything about it screams that, right? Obviously, they're all witches, they're all women, and then while they are literally doing this dance towards the moon, towards the celestial bodies, right? And I hate to say it this way, but they are doing sexual moans is the best way I can describe it. And it was very uncomfortable. I was like, wait a minute. What? Wait. Why in the heck is this in Star Wars? Why is there any moaning at all in Star Wars? It was very uncomfortable. And I can see reaction be like, oh, you're just uncomfortable with yourself. It's like, no. I'm uncomfortable with the fact that Star Wars has never been about this at all, should never be about this at all, and you're creating a fan fiction that's lacking the fan dynamic. You're creating a pure fiction because you heard some things about Star Wars and said, you know what, I'm going to make my own story, and I'm just going to say, screw the lore, screw everything else about it. And then you're going to do it poorly to boot. You're not even going to tell a good one. One of my favorite moments, that's not really being talked about a whole lot, one of my favorite moments is they show you younger versions of the 4 Jedis that we've seen previously established in the first couple of episodes, the ones that May is trying to kill. And the one that was in that trance, right? The one Jedi who was in that trance, who they aged up like heck, and it looked awful. He was balding, gray. You could tell the actor was clearly younger. Okay, what happens in this episode is only supposed to have taken place, 10 to 15 years before the events of the last episode? And he instead is a young Padawan in this episode. So he goes from a young Padawan to old, established Jedi in the matter of 10 years, losing his hair, getting all gray. It's like, wait. That does just not logically make any sense whatsoever. And also, it makes your decision to put all of that makeup and do the whole thing with his balding hair and everything like that make even less sense. Because if you were at least trying to say this was a long time ago, it's like, no, it's like 10, 15 years when the twins were kids. Somehow they've all aged, everyone else has aged pretty naturally, right? All the other Jedi seem to age naturally. And then for him, it's like he goes from being young Padawan, again, young Padawan with the little tail, everything. And we all know Jedi start very young. By the time that they're Padawan learners, they're still very young. Usually they're not, at least from what's been established, Padawans for too long before they become knights. When they're knights, they're usually still pretty young too. So if he's a Padawan, he's got to be in his teens? Early 20s at most? And you're going to try to tell me that he looks like a 60-year-old, a balding 50, 60-year-old man in 10 years? Please. This is coming from the same logic mind, or illogical mind, I should say, that said, yeah, campfire in space, no problem. No biggie. There's no logic here. There is no logic within this show. And that's one of the more frustrating things about it, is that if at least there was logic within it, I would have a logical way to combat it. But when you have and start from complete illogical sense, it's very hard to actually fight against it, other than just to say it's illogical and try to point out the moments where it is. Unknownst, what's going on? Unknown, what's up? Scott McKenzie, Disney really has become a rumor network. Yep, absolutely. Amber Sherpot, surprised PETA is not a character. Seriously. Laura says, I feel like the episode was a trap, forcing people to critique the L storyline or the bad child acting. Oh, absolutely. But also, that would require them to have intelligence, and I don't think they have it. And I'm not saying that trying to be mean. I'm saying that because what they have written does not make any sense, either within the episode or within the universe that has been established or within any frame of reference. Honestly, I feel like this episode was created just to give Leslie Headland an outlet for her own emotional traumas. Because at one point, there's a line, and a lot of people are giving it notice, saying, women like us aren't welcome in the galaxy. It's like, oh, what do you mean by that? Now, to be fair, Leslie Headland actually, from what I can remember from the credits, is not listed as a writer for this episode. Now, as someone who is in charge of the show, as someone who's created the show, I imagine she had some influence over the lines and over the general characterizations. But I don't think that there's a wrong point to what you're saying. That people are going to focus more so on the lesbian storyline or on the bad child acting and not on where it needs to be, which is the garbage tier writing. And the fact that they are, in addition, or rather in connection to that bad writing, destroying the very essence of what Star Wars is and has always been. This is, again, it hasn't been Star Wars for a long time, not how we've understood it, but now you've gotten to the point where you are changing a core principle. Beforehand, you were just goofing around, playing around with emotions of people, of things that people really enjoyed. Now you're taking a key central tenet of the universe and playing with it. It's going to be very hard to stand on that. It's going to be very hard to hold on to people as an audience when you start playing around with things like, oh yeah, the Force isn't what you've thought it to be. Everything that has been established about the Force, yeah, it's actually not true. Just going to make it up. Which is weird because in the episode, they give a clear reference to the fact that they are still under the impression that midichlorians exist. Because at one point, they take blood from the twins. Or at the very least, just from the one that we actually get to see during the test. Because the general premise of the episode is that these coven of witches are preparing for this, what they call ascension ceremony, where the two twins, apparently they have not had children in many, many, many years since they've left, probably because it's all women, and naturally women cannot have children on their own. That's just a biological fact. But apparently the one who is the head witch, who they call Mother, she is called Mother by everyone, is able to, through using the thread, not the Force, but using the thread, was able to have two children within the womb of another one of the witches, who says at one point, I carried them, right? Obviously meaning that she was the actual mother of the children, even though the children don't actually call her mother. They don't even give her any reverence as their biological mother. Instead, it all goes to the tribe's mother. Again, very weird dynamics going on here, right? Clearly, there's a romantic relationship between those two characters, though, of the mother and of the woman who carried the children. But it's all setting up for the fact that because these children have not been around for a long time, let alone twins. That's another big thing, it seems. So what is going to happen is that the ceremony, this ascension ceremony, which, again, is a part of this pagan death cult nonsense that they put into the show, where all the witches do this very weird, very erotic dance, and towards the moon, towards celestial body, there's like some kind of eclipse going on too, and then she is able to draw like this thread from the celestial bodies, and is then able to give the power, or give some power, to May, and then Osha does not want it. And so then the Jedi come in, though, and interrupt the ceremony, which is also never picked back up again either. It's like, okay, usually ceremonies got to do right then and there, right? But they're just like, nope, I guess we'll just pause it. She gets the power and she doesn't get the power, but they clearly both still have the Force. Okay. Whatever the heck that's supposed to mean. And so then the Jedi come in and say, well, hey, we see that there's children here, and you know the laws of the New Republic. Children have to be tested. If they show Force sensitivities, they've got to be tested by the Jedi. And so ultimately, even though they're clearly against the Jedi, they eventually say, yes, they can be tested. The mother then says, please lie to the Jedi so that you can stay with us. Osha says, I don't want to lie, because clearly she has morals and principles and these other people don't, but they're meant not to look like the bad guys. Jedis are in many ways made to look like the bad guys here. And so when they go through the process, May lies, and so therefore walks back, whereas Osha is convinced to not lie. She tries to, but then she's clearly not comfortable with it. And at one point, her blood is taken. And when her blood is taken during that process, you're like, oh, why are they doing that? Oh, that's right. Go back to the prequels. What do? They take a blood sample and test the midichlorian count of young Anakin. So that clearly is what that is referencing there. So they're establishing that the whole midichlorian thing is still canon within this universe, while at the same time now also making up this whole new thing with the thread and Force nonsense. Okay. All to which you get to the end of the episode, where these two girls, by the way, so not only is the direction and writing for these two young girls terrible, I'm going to try to avoid going after them because, again, they obviously are young actors and they've not been trained, and it's very clear they have not received training. But what's worse is that they did not get good direction to overcome that. So that's on the director, purely on the director, and the writing did not help them either. So not only was their relationship nonsensical, they're supposed to love each other, and yet they're constantly fighting each other. You feel no emotion between them. There is no chemistry between them as siblings. They're called siblings, they're called twins, but you would honestly believe that, oh, these people probably have never met before in their entire life because there's no connection between them at all. Which just makes the entire episode even that much more nonsensical, because why do they care about each other? It's not being shown on screen, it's not being shown in the writing either. And so even though they're supposed to be close, they're never actually shown to be close. They're shown to be fighting more so than anything else. Then at the very end, when Osha decides she wants to go with the Jedis and be with them, her sister, who is supposed to love her and care about her, I'm going to kill you. Wish I was making this up. But no, Larry says, I know what I have to do. Instead of just letting you go off to be a Jedi and then me stay here and be a witch, which is something that she's supposed to want. No, I'm going to kill you. And it's not even I'm going to kill you to stop you from yourself. It's just, no, I'm going to kill you. You're like, oh, okay. So a little sociopathic here. Hasn't really been built up to be sociopathic, but okay. Gotcha. And then she starts a little fire in this palace, building, whatever it is you want to call it, compound. Let's call it a compound, because really it's a cult, right? So this lesbian sex cult compound, okay? She starts a fire in this place that's mostly made of brick and stone, and somehow this tiny little fire becomes a raging inferno that kills all of the witches. Now, there is a moment where you hear this loud cry that's clearly a collection of female voices, like this kind of cry. Don't ask me to do that again. That's how I remember it sounding, indicating that the witches have died somehow. All right, so it's not like the witches have burned to death. It's something has caused them to die, or at least that's the perception. For all we know, they're probably still alive, right? Because no one ever really dies in Star Wars unless they are a white male Jedi Master who drinks poison to kill himself for white guilt, which, by the way, also makes no sense because he had almost nothing to do with the events of what was going on in this planet. And again, remember, all this happens because May starts a little fire. May does, to try to kill her sister so that her sister doesn't go and join the Jedi for reasons. The witches just die in this episode, right? They just have this united cry and then they all die. This inferno then takes over the entire compound, which is mostly made of stone and rock, and we're meant to believe that as they're on this bridge where it's, what have you done? What have you done? Kind of dialogue going back and forth. This bridge where both of the twins are on, they're looking at each other shouting. It breaks. They have a moment of, oh my gosh, I need to help you. And then all of a sudden it's back to, I hate you. So it's like, You feel like there's never a consistent moment between these two. As I said, you feel no emotion. There is no emotional connection between these two. And if you don't have that emotional connection, this show does not work. There's a lot of other reasons why this show does not work, but that's a core part of what this show is. That was hard enough. That was going to already be hard enough for you to play off by having the same actress play two different characters. But now when you have a chance to establish it at least with two different actresses, you fail to do that too. Both with the way in which they were directed and the way in which they were actually written. So you have this fire that happens that destroys the compound. The bridge breaks. May falls and presumably dies. We obviously know from the first episode that's not the case. So there's obviously also no real stakes to that moment either, because you're like, okay, I know she's okay. And then the Jedi who has trained, in the first episode, we know him to have trained Osha, randomly comes back in to try to save both of them. Obviously, he can't save May, but he ends up saving Osha. And then he has this very weird emotional cry. Like, I love you. I'm going to take care of you. It's like, y'all have barely interacted with one another. How is there already this emotional connection? It makes no sense. Again, this episode does not work as a Star Wars episode. It does not work as an individual episode. There are so many logical problems and inconsistencies, and there's no clear driving force of plot, of cohesion, of elements. So to say I hated the episode is an understatement. As to why I hated the episode, it actually has even less to do with the whole lesbian sex death cult thing. Obviously, I hate that, but that's only one piece of the puzzle. The bigger thing is that at the core of this show, at the core of this specific episode, there is a glaring flaw of illogical discourse, of a complete lack of logic and a complete lack of any core principles or ideas. And if you don't have at least something like that to hold on to keep calling back to, you really don't have a show. $180 million was wasted on 8 episodes of what is now, even according to Forbes.com, at least with episode 3, the worst iteration of Star Wars that has ever been put on screen, big or small. Anyway, back to the chat. Let's see at 10:11. Father Luca. What's going on, Father Luca? Laudate Jesus Christus in secula. I think I'll read myself some sacred monster of Thomism rather than watching the abomination called the Acolyte. That would be a much better use of time for sure. I am Gem AS. What's going on? Heartbreak Ridge. Hail to you. Thanks for being here. Thank you for the quick shipping, by the way. No problem, Heartbreak Ridge. It's one of the beauties of using the media mail. Oh, yeah, it was bad, JMS. It was really, really bad. Ambrose Chamberpot, who's a member, says they need binary Jar Jar Binks to save the series. Yes. Oh, man, the only thing that could save it now would be some Jar Jar. Jim 1 tried to say, I wouldn't be surprised if episode 4 has a fire starting underwater. Why not go for all 4 elements and have a fire starting on fire for episode 5? Yeah, why not have fire in all your episodes? Or at least most of them, right? No, episode 4, I imagine, is going to pick back up where we left off with the Wookiee Jedi, the one that we left off with episode 2. And it's going to continue to go on into this just tailspin of illogical premises. And I imagine what I think is going to happen is that the witches who we thought were dead are actually going to be alive. There's going to be a, quote, battle between the Jedi and the witches, and it's going to be stupid. And based off of how the woman who carried the children, it's weird that you have to even say it that way, right? But the witch who carried the twins has the horns on her head, right? Now, they don't really establish who these people are other than that they are a coven of witches that were ostracized from the rest of the world. And so they've taken place in isolation in this compound, right? In this stone-built compound. And so my guess is that and I wouldn't be surprised if this was the case, they try to make some connection because the woman who carried the children has the horns on her head that are akin to what we found in witches from previously established Star Wars stories, and more notably from what most people consider to be actual canon of Star Wars, the same horns that you see on Darth Maul's head, or similar horns. I would not be surprised if the witches come back and then they establish that this is the place where all that comes from. And they try to bring like Darth Maul and connections to that in some way. It wouldn't, it would not surprise me if they try to go that route. Jim Watson, what's going on? Welcome back. 626 Charles over on Rumble. What's going on? 626 Charles. See, Kincaid and Rumsky. What's up, brother? Had to say, do you think, like I do, that George Lucas meant the Force to resemble the Holy Spirit and Jedis to be priests, etc.? I think that he has been asked this before and has made comments about it, so I can't speak for him myself. What I will say is that there is clearly, whether it is known by him or not, clearly a connection and an inspiration by Christian theology, right? Because there is this understanding of a force, of a spirit that binds us together. May the Force be with you. May the Lord be with you. I mean, there's a lot of connections to be made there, right? So I definitely think that there's some influences. Jedis as priest, I don't know as much, but I would assume that there's probably some connections there. Obviously, the fact that they take a vow of abstinence is very much connected to our understanding of priests, especially within the Catholic Church. So it would not surprise me if there was a strong connection. But again, I think he's spoken about that previously. I don't know off the top of my head what he has said. The Morak says, an intimacy coordinator was hired for this series. I don't remember this being a thing before. Yeah. And so my guess is like, where? Because of to their credit, at least with the two lesbian witches, lack of better expression, they actually don't even have them kiss in the show. This is supposed to be the gayest thing that we've ever had, right? This is the gayest Star Wars ever had. Coming from the creators, I believe, have said this very thing too, right? Meant to be very inclusive. And yet all we've gotten is like just the typical like, oh, forehead to forehead, just like we had in in Furiosa, right? A similar dynamic there. But it honestly wouldn't surprise me if they needed an intimacy coordinator for the freaking moon dance. As I mentioned, there's no better way to describe that the sounds that they are making, especially at the very beginning, are akin to moans. And if anyone has ever had any thought of showing this show to their children, please don't. This episode especially should tell everyone that, yeah, this is clearly not a family franchise anymore. I don't care what George Lucas has said in the past. He said, oh, it was meant for kids, but no. Like, this series specifically is not made for Star Wars fans. It's not made for kids. Do not let your kids watch this, especially this episode. Very, again, inappropriate, uncomfortable nonsense in this show, in this episode especially. And lost my train of thought there. But big thing is, oh yeah, it's not made for Star Wars fans. It's not made for kids. So then who is it made for? And honestly, the only thing I could think of is this is just like where Rian Johnson made a movie in The Last Jedi for himself. He made it for himself, right? And for other elite-minded people like him who liked what he did in that film. This was made for Leslie Headland. Leslie Headland made this for Leslie Headland. And for anyone else who buys into her nonsense. So the only real fans of this show that are going to exist, I imagine, after this episode are going to be those that are in the woke DEI camp. Who are the ones that have the pride flags in their background during the month of June and do all the other nonsense. Because I don't know who else this show is being made for. When you have some of the biggest Star Wars fans who have defended other things that even Kathleen Kennedy has been a part of as far as her projects are concerned. When you have people like them who are even going after this show, going after this episode, that tells you a lot. When the only defenders of this episode, the only defenders of this show now, especially at this point, the only argument that they have, the only response they have is, well, you're just homophobic. Or you just don't like it because there happen to be featured gay people. It's like, I'm sorry, If that is your only argument, you got nothing. Because I've just given you several different examples of how illogical the show is, how problematic the show is, not from even a moral standpoint. Trust me, there's plenty of moral problems with it, but even just from a, does this make sense? Does this actually work from any logical standpoint? Showing you, no, it doesn't at all, in fact. That is, I think, something very important for us to bring up here. We don't have to go for the low-hanging fruit. And I would say that to anyone who's watching this, by the way, 58 people watching, smash that like button, only 32 likes. Smash that like button, helps out a lot. Share this out as well for people who think that they want to be a part of this conversation, or other people you think would, appreciate, enjoy this conversation. And I'll get back to the chat. But honestly, I think that the thing that needs to be talked about with this show is less about that stuff, because that's low-hanging fruit. That's easy to criticize. That's something that they've been very upfront with. But when you go after the show at the core of what it is, which is a show that lacks any and all logic, a show that exists purely for the means of a egomaniacal woman, in the case of Leslie Headland, who is just making the show for herself and was given $180 million by Disney to do so. By the way, not giving stock advice here, not giving financial advice, because I have no expertise in this area, but I'm sorry, I don't see how one can stay invested in Disney after the kind of crap that we're seeing. There's so many other things that we can go to with Disney for this, but at this point, especially with this episode, you have to imagine, if you're an investor in Disney, you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, $180 million of our company was just put into a show that features at least 22.5 million or so of that being put into 45 minutes of content that lacks any reason or logic or general storytelling framework. As Forbes says, worst Star Wars ever. That's a huge statement to make. Amber Shermanpot says, I aged that badly in 15 years too. That badly? That badly, though? Especially for a guy who is supposed to have been essentially in this weird coma trance for about that length of time, which even then you're like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. Mr. Roy, what's going on, Mr. Roy? Welcome back. Welcome back. Thanks for being a member here. And again, if you're new to the show, please put @Odin at the very beginning of your comment. @Odin lets me know that you're trying to get my attention. Means a lot. Amber Sharonpot saying hello. Dion, it's been a while, man. Welcome back, Dion. Welcome. Eric Brown, what's going on? So episode 2, Mock's Communion, Drink for Absolution. Episode 3, Mock's Confirmation. I think you could definitely make some connections there. Honestly, I don't think that even Leslie Headland is that clever. I'm just going to be honest. But you could definitely make some connections, I think. Heartbreak Rage, trying to say Star Wars has gone from being a Saturday morning serial to a nearly Skinamax special. Yeah. Yeah, and again, for anyone that has not watched it, I'm sure the clips are online. I wouldn't even say to watch the clips because, honestly, it was very unsettling. The whole moon dance moaning thing. Because you're watching it as a Star Wars show. Your mindset is, okay, I'm in the Star Wars universe, or at least I'm supposed to be in the Star Wars universe. And then that happens, you're like, whoa, what? That's not Star Wars. What the heck was that? That doesn't make any sense. But that's what happens when you give $180 million to Leslie Headland and ask her to write you a show based on our fifis. Forever Sci-Fi, Disney, thank you for being a member on the channel, says Disney Wars is what you get when women who specialize in gender studies try to write science fiction. I think that there's definitely a point to be made there, Forever Sci-Fi. I would say, even more simply than that, this is what happens when you give $180 million to someone who can't write, who has a only marginal understanding of what Star Wars is. Maybe she saw the films when she was very young, has barely any record of what it is, and then tell her to write a show. And tell her to write it her way. And so what does she do? She has these caricatures. That's one of the best ways to explain it, really. You have a bunch of caricatures of Star Wars characters. You have a caricature of the Jedi. You have a caricature of the dark side. And what she's decided to do is to say, I'm going to be so clever here because no one's ever tried No one's ever tried to show that maybe the Jedi aren't the good guys. So I'm going to do that. It's been tried before. Please spare me. But you give that person $180 million and tell her to tell the story her way, this is what you get. This is what you get. And never in my life would I ever have thought that we would have Weird Dance Moon by which lesbian sex cult. Not on the bingo card of Star Wars fans, I imagine. And that's why I wouldn't be surprised if there is a huge amount of people that check out. Don't be surprised if the numbers, by the way, for this episode are higher. Because it got so much hype because of the controversy. People are probably just genuinely saying, I got to see what this is, right? And for those that are critical saying you shouldn't watch it, look, while I agree, because I think that if you are someone where you don't need this stuff, right, you obviously have no desire for this stuff, okay? But to cede the space entirely to say, oh, we should just not talk about it, we should just ignore it, we should just not watch it, it's like, look, if we cede the space, guess what that means? All you have left are those weird apologists on Twitter who are trying to say that this is a good thing. That's the only voice that's out there. So there has to be a voice that's critical. And as someone who has, and yes, I will admit this about myself, I have read, I think it's relevant because we're talking about bad writing here, right? Great example of bad writing. The Twilight series, okay? The Twilight series, talking here about the books, not even just the movies. Both are bad, but the books. So I remember I was in like maybe high school when the series was coming out, and I was like, this is stupid. This is dumb. And one of the immediate responses is, well, have you even read it? Have you read the book? Well, then you can't say anything. So what I did, because this is how stubborn I am, this is kind of a part of, I get this from my dad, just my stubbornness. Shout out to my dad. Love you. But I do get this from him, my stubbornness. I said, okay, you know what then? I'm going to read the book. So I got like a used copy for cheap. So that way I didn't give any real money to the writer. Got a used copy for like a few bucks of the first book. And I read the first book. I suffered through reading the entire book. And I literally tell people, you don't know why I read it? So that I could then respond to anyone when I said that Twilight was garbage. As soon as the question, because you knew it would come up, have you even read the book? I'd say, actually, yes, I have read the book from cover to cover, and it's garbage. I even was going to do it with the second one, and I got to a point where I was like, I can't do that anymore. I think it's enough to say I've read the first one and a little bit of the second one, and I can just tell you, no, it's bad. There's a part in the second book where literally the author, to try to convey time passing, has several blank pages, and the only thing on the page is the month. So it's meant to be like January, February, March, April. Oh, all these months where Bella's feeling so lonely. Yeah, I read that. Garbage. So if I'm going to talk about Star Wars, if I'm going to criticize Leslie Headland, if I'm going to criticize Lucasfilm Star Wars under the leadership of Kathleen Kennedy, guess what? I got to have an idea of what I'm talking about. I have to have seen the garbage. Anyway. Bryant Barth in the chat. What's up? He said, hail, and then said, I think Babylon 5 is a great show. It is a wonderful show. We'll talk about Babylon 5 in a second. Brian Barr says, I have no interest in the Acolyte. Yep. It says, so it has come to a point where Jar Jar is no longer the most hated thing in Star Wars. I mean, it's been past for a while. King Rumsky says, the Acolyte or Meg 2? Never seen Meg 2. I've talked about this previously, right? But I would much rather watch the Meg 2. Because at least that one might be funny. I never want to watch episode 3 of this show ever again. I can say that much. And if I wasn't a part of conversations about the show on Friday Night Tights and Salty Saturday for the Salty Nerd podcast, I wouldn't be watching this show. I try to avoid this nonsense because there's people who can do a much better job than I can criticizing this stuff. But if I am going to criticize this stuff, and if I am going to be a part of shows where we criticize it, I got to know what I'm talking about. Mr. Wink, who are you people? What's up, Mr. Wink? Our pet troll. Scott McKenzie, who's a member, says, I think George's worldview transformed from before OG through it to the prequels, from Christian to New Age. to adding science biology from spiritual and mystical to science to now woke. I think that's a great analysis, Scott McKenzie, because there is a clear difference between the OG trilogy and the prequels. That's why I'm very critical of the prequels. I know there's prequels defenders out there. Prequels are infinitely better than the nonsense that we have today. There's no doubt about that. Even the writing of the prequels is better than this. And even the most ardent supporters of the prequels will say, yeah, the writing, especially the dialogue of the prequels, is not good. Annie, you're breaking my heart. There's also not good direction either. Notoriously bad direction in the prequels. This is worse. Writing, worse. Direction might actually be on par. I haven't decided yet. Because as I said, I was getting a lot of Jake Lloyd vibes from these two young actresses. And I have to again remind myself, that means, guess what? Who is the responsibility for the performance on? It's not on the child, it's on the director, and it's on the writer, the person who gave the child the lines to say that are bad, and the director for allowing that performance, and also for not saying, hey, maybe we should get a different actor. Or at least being a talented enough director to get a workable performance from what you're working with, instead of what we got. Another aspect of it is, again, this all comes down to writing as well. This is more so makeup, hair, right? But it's, again, part of the writing. In order for us, because we must be stupid, the audience must be stupid, in order for us to know that the two young girls in the show are the same two young girls later on, right? The twins. Instead of the fact that, again, many years have passed, they decide to give the two girls the same exact hairstyle as the two girls later on. No variation. In fact, the one arguable variation is that the bad twin has extensions. But it's like the same cut. It's the same hair. And I'm thinking to myself, that's a small thing, but it's also illogical. You're like, wait a minute, you're saying that they have the same hair from when they were around 8 years old all the way until they're like 16 into their 20s? With no change, no variation whatsoever, and they're separated by time and space for that length of time, and yet they're still going to look just the exact same? Okay. That's a wasted opportunity to show growth. Tina Guzman, what's up, Tina? Says, Disney hasn't learned their lesson. Isn't this for kids? It sounds dark. No, this is not for kids. Do not let your kids watch this show. And as I said before, has very little to do with the lesbian death cult, though I think that's reason enough to not let them watch it. It's because during the whole cult moon dance thing, there is very uncomfortable moaning sounds, which is what helps confirm it. It's a whole sex cult thing. Very, very, very weird. Jim 1, thanks for tagging, saying, I think a lot of people who gave this show benefit of the doubt will likely drop off, especially with House of the Dragon coming back on Sunday. Oh yeah, House of the Dragon is going to whip this show's butt. House of the Dragon is going to destroy this show. I would even argue, because after this show and after, I think it's after House of the Dragon, you then also get the return of Rings of Power. I think Rings of Power Season 2 is going to destroy this show as far as ratings. Because, again, you look at, and this is where box office comes in, right? You go back to The Force Awakens. That film made what? Over $2 billion. Huge return, right? People have been waiting for Star Wars for so long. People were hungry for it. Over $2 billion. Then you get to The Last Jedi, and it goes from, what, 2.5, 2.6 billion, drops down to about 1.3. Okay. So almost half the audience, roughly half the audience, between the first and second film in your trilogy. That's not good. That is not good. By the time you get to the last film, it gets to $1 billion. By the way, that last film also lost about $100 million because of how much it cost to make and how much more money they made internationally versus domestically. So you already lost half of the audience, arguably, more than half of the audience, at least for moviegoers, with the sequel trilogy. You got rid of about half your audience. Then you go all the way to the shows, and you start off with Mandalorian view count, view hours, whatever views that they're reporting, which were a lot bigger than what we're seeing here. The fact that this show is tracking behind even that of the Ahsoka show is telling you you're losing audience with every single show. And this episode is going to push even more people away. The shows themselves are already doing that, okay? Obi-Wan pushed people away. Ahsoka pushed people away. Now you're going to have even more people pushed away, and this episode is going to be the crux of it, and it's going to have almost nothing to do with what many people are going to be talking about with the show. Because even though those are elements, absolutely. Not going to say those are not important things, right? The whole, she has two moms. That's a very small problem in the much bigger problem that is the entire world building, or lack thereof world building, of the show. It's just objectively a terrible show. See, Laura says, also the white male Jedi takes the girl's blood without hurting. Yeah, it doesn't ask. Doesn't ask her either. Doesn't warn her about it. Just goes straight up to her and be like, bloop, took your blood. And then she's like, ow, what was that? It's like, wait a minute. You're not going to at least ask for it? It goes on. Yeah, I think it was weird the white male Jedi took Osha's blood without her consent. Just did it. Yeah, exactly. Just did it. Now, I don't know if, was that supposed to be a, that shows us that the Jedi aren't really, but it goes back to that, right? That's the same Jedi who takes his own life because of what happened that day. And it's like, that's basically the fullest involvement that he had in the entire events of that, was taking Osha's blood without asking her first. Oh man, so guilty about that. I'm going to drink poison. Scott McKenzie's great scream. Need to get ready for a call for work. Have a great day, everybody. Hey, thank you, Scott McKenzie. Appreciate you stopping by. Don't worry, we are going to talk about Babylon 5, but I want to make sure to get through all of the Star Wars talk. And again, I know that Geeks and Gamers Daily is going to be starting soon, so we'll probably start our Babylon 5 talk in a few minutes. Forever Sci-Fi, clearly they didn't spend any of that $180 billion on one of those women in STEM as a science coordinator. Nope. Yeah, maybe instead of having an emotions coordinator, a intimacy coordinator, how about instead you have I actually said this on Twitter the other day, bring the nerds back. Remember when they had like the story group and they were supposed to be in charge of canon, and some of them did an okay job and some of them didn't, right? Bring the nerds back into the writer rooms, because the nerds are there to say, actually, you're not supposed to do that. And I don't say that in a way of mocking. It's a way of saying, no, that's what you need. You need someone who is going to say, I know this universe better than any of you in here. That's not how the Force works. That's not how the Force works. And with this episode, they would have said, wait a minute. The Force is not a thread. The Force is not this thread thing. Stop trying to make the thread thing a thing. Stop trying to make fetch happen. Stop trying to make the thread a thing. It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. Sebastian, has there been any marketing for Inside Out 2? Feels like there is zero talk about this movie. Clearly there has been, because the pre-orders have been good. Now, I will say this again. Pre-orders are not the end-all be-all. They only account for a portion of opening weekend box office. Because pre-orders could be opening night. Pre-orders could be opening weekend. However many showings there are currently in the system for a given theater count as pre-orders. So if they say, oh man, $80 million in pre-orders, I'm not saying that that's what they're saying. But let's say they have showtimes from opening night all the way up until the next Thursday. Okay, that means any purchases that have happened over that length of time. Now, most of them are going to be coming from opening day, right? That opening Thursday, opening Friday. But clearly there has been marketing. Clearly it's been working too. I think Inside Out 2, though I don't think it's going to be as successful as some might think it will be better than, I think it will be better than a lot of the previous animated releases from Disney. Because I do think the first Inside Out did have enough of an impact on people to be able to hold on to some of its audience. Heartbreak Ridge. As my wife would say, the Twilight series is fan fiction with the serial numbers found off. Yep. Jim 1, tag to say, Master Torben is the same actor who played Tommen Baratheon in Game of Thrones, so he has now jumped out a window and drank poison. Yep. 2 shows where his character has taken his own life. I'm sure that's not going to have any psychological connections or problems for that young actor. Because I'm sure he's an adult now at this point, right? He's got to be in his late teens, early 20s, at least, in real life. But yeah, so the young actor that played Tommen Baratheon, still young, and he plays a young Padawan in this episode, but then somehow over the course of 10 plus years, 10, 15 years, all of a sudden now he's like this old man with really bad makeup. Oh, man. I am JMS. That episode might actually be the worst thing Star Wars has ever put out there. Again, even mainstream media is now saying so. Mr. Wink, there's some new names I haven't seen here before, Mr. Wink. Yeah, I mean, it is an earlier show. So people from across Europe can much more easily watch this one than the night show. Kane Rumsky says, I knew it. I hate sand. It gets everywhere. I love that line so much. It's such a bad line, but I say it all the time because I actually associate with that line. I am Anakin Skywalker as far as his opinions on sand, because I feel the same way. I don't like sand. It's coarse, rough, irritating. It gets everywhere. I don't like the beach. Brian Bart trying to say, I have a soft spot for prequels, but I know it's not George's best days. He had too many yes men, and yes, the dialogue is bad. Yep. Chris Curran, thank you very much for the $2 super chat saying, as a longtime collector, I am done. Time to sell. Yeah. A lot of people are starting to give up. And that's what's so interesting is that with every single new phase of Star Wars, more people are leaving. Like, we hear this happen all the time saying, is this the end of Star Wars? Is this the end of Star Wars? I'm done now. I'm done now. But there is some truth to that because if you look at the numbers, they're progressively getting worse. So again, the numbers that we have here are a lot worse than the numbers that we had for Ahsoka. And I imagine that the numbers going forward, especially after this episode, because you might see a bump with this episode because of the interest, you might see a decrease too. Because remember, the initial, 11 million views that they reported on was for 2 episodes, and that was worldwide. So we don't know how many people dropped off between episode 1 and 2. Because they're counting those views as those that watch episode 1 and episode 2 as separate things. So meaning, let's say 10 million people watched episode 1, and then only 2 million people watched episode 2. They'll say 12 million people have watched the show. It's like, yes, but that means that you went from 10 to 2. See why it's important to get it per episode and not just? So that's why it'll be interesting because this is just a single episode. So what kind of numbers are we going to see in the, first day reporting? But yeah, Chris, thank you very much for that super chat. I think there's a lot of truth to it. Mr. Wing, but what about Babylon 5? I probably missed it. No, we're going to talk about it. Don't worry. We're getting there. Big Worm, who's a member, says, my son wanted to watch Acolyte. I watched it with him. It's painful. The second episode with the fire had him lost. Don't know the fire doesn't work in space. Last night, rocks don't burn. Big Worm, yeah. And I would say to anyone out there, don't watch this last episode, especially with your kids. King and Ramsky had to say, everyone knows the evil twin gets a mohawk cut, a mullet at the very least. I mean, the only distinguishing factor they have is that she has gone through the ascension, whatever that is. So she's got a little mark on her forehead. Okay. The Morak Herman's head was a better version of Inside Out. Never seen it. The message that you should self-delete over guilt is a horrible message. I agree. There are a lot of moral problems in this show. Absolutely. Because, yeah, it tries to say, oh, yeah, taking your own life over white guilt, that's an okay thing to do. That's fine. Even if you take it just at a basic, taking your own life over general guilt. That's not a good message to be sending. My kid shouldn't be watching that. No one's kid should be watching that garbage. And then you get to the whole cult thing, and you're like, ooh. Dragon Bricks tag say, maybe the young actor wants to be like Sean Bean, who died at the end of most of the movies. Different. All right, caught up with the chat, so let's go ahead now and talk about Babylon 5 because it is in the title of the video, and we are going to, of course, talk about it. So, giving a recap. So, I finished Season 4 of Babylon 5. I had started it last summer and was able to finally finish it yesterday or 2 days ago. Last couple of days. I've been dealing with some illness, and so I've had a little bit more time. So, anyway, just a bit of a recap. This season, from 1996, 1997, let me go ahead and actually pull that up on the screen so that way we can see it together. That way we can do this together, right? Let's do this together. All right. So as it says here, and this, I guess, spoilers for anyone that has not seen Babylon 5 or has interest in Babylon 5 or anything like that. But it says here, no surrender, no retreat from 96 to 97. Sheridan returns to Zahadun with the help of a strange being known as Lorien, who has given Sheridan 20 more years to live. The Vorlons alarm the other races when they begin destroying entire planets that have been influenced by the shadows. Malari, fearing the Vorlons will destroy Centauri Prime, destroys the Shadow base there and executes Mr. Morden. Sheridan learns that the Vorlons and Shadows were tasked as caretakers for younger races in the galaxy, but due to profound differences in ideology, have been at war for eons, using the younger races as pawns in a proxy war. With the help of other ancient races, Sheridan convinces the Vorlons and Shadows to leave and cease interfering with the younger races. And this is actually, for me, where the show, because again, that's kind of just a recap of the first half of the season, where the show kind of loses me a little bit. Because the whole concept of the Shadow War was very interesting. It felt like everything was moving, everything was going towards something. And then you get to a point, and as it says here in the summary, Mr. Garibaldi returns to Babylon 5 with no explanation for his disappearance. So once it goes there, like I don't know if there was a mid-season break or whatever it might be, but once Garibaldi comes back, and it's clear that he's been impacted in some way, influenced in some way. We find out obviously later on about the involvement with Psycor. But once that happens, the show kind of hits a lull. Because I'm like, okay, I feel now at this point, I don't have the same fun characters with Jakar and with Londo and with Garibaldi anymore, right? I don't have those fun interactions because Jakar has been scarred emotionally, clearly, perfectly sensibly, because of the atrocities that were done by Centauri Prime, by the Centaurians, right? Especially by Londo as well. Kind of trying to build up that tension between those two. But he's not the fun-loving guy as he once was. Londo, of course, no longer that fun-loving guy because he's been influenced by the Shadows and is doing all these terrible things. And then all of a sudden now Garibaldi, who has now this personality shift as well. We find out later on what it is. But that character's also gone. So there's this time in which it's a lot of build-up. It's a lot of exposition, basically, right? And there's some, like, episode of the week, not monster of the week, but, like, kind of episode of the week stuff going on. And all of it's really building up to the last couple of episodes of the season, which are really, really good, or last few episodes of the season. But that middle section, especially when you have all the fun characters that used to be fun are no longer fun, was a little hard for me to get invested into, to be honest. And there wasn't seemingly as much action going on either, at least from what I remember. Again, part of the season I watched last year, and so I don't have the full, retention of memory. As far as episodes that I liked and episodes that I did not like, though, I would definitely say that an episode that I know someone from last night, Cthulhu, believe it was you, said, I want you to talk about that episode. Okay? So the episode in time is the episode which is Intersections in Real Time. So this is the episode where Sheridan is ruthlessly interrogated by Earth Alliance. And so it deals with different ethical questions because Sheridan is tortured mentally, physically. And the first thing I'll say is the actor that plays the interrogator is really good. I liked him a lot. And the episode gave me a lot of vibes of one of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes of all time, which is The Obsolete Man. If you've never seen The Obsolete Man, it is a phenomenal episode of Twilight Zone and just great television, great acting, everything about it. Everything that the Acolyte is not is in that show and is in that episode especially, okay? But this episode of Babylon 5, Intersections in Real Time, gave me a lot of vibes of that. So the interrogator was very, very good. I liked the actor that played him a lot. I thought he played his role very well, the psychological warfare. Some of the problems that I had, though, and this comes not only from a writing, but also, of course, philosophical issue is, of course, he talks about truth and reality. And obviously, he's trying to break Sheridan, and so it makes sense. But the interrogator uses the logic of all that I have told you since I've come into this room is true. He says, good morning. Sheridan says, it's not morning. There's no light out there. He's like, oh, that's your perception? Oh, let me turn this light off and on. So your perception of reality is warped, meaning that the truth is flexible, right? The truth is not objective. The problem, though, is that in the writing, he's trying to make the argument that truth is subjective while at the same time claiming to be objective. He says, I'm doing this Not because I want to, right? I'm just an objective observer. All that I've told you is true, is objective truth. It's like, but wait a minute. You can't on the one hand deny objective truth and then say that you are standing for objective truth. Now, of course, you could if you are a part of a corrupt political elite class. So I guess if that is where they're trying to go with it, okay, I'd be willing to give that for sure. Definitely be willing to give that for sure. But one of the other ethical questions is about the choices that Sheridan makes. And so at one point, Sheridan is shown a character, right? Is shown one of the other alien races. And he has also been tortured. This other character has been tortured. And he is about to give a confession that is a fake confession, a false confession. And Sheridan convinces him to not do it. But by doing so, he puts the life of that person at risk. He puts the life of that alien at risk. Because he is told, right, this is your last chance, this is your last chance. And Sheridan basically is trying to pressure him, don't give in, don't give in. And the question I think morally that's being asked is, if you have someone in front of you being threatened, if you have your friends, your compatriots being threatened, and if you even at the end, they say, well, we really want you to give this confession, even though the confession is not true. We want you to believe that it's true. We want the other people to believe it's true. And we want you to do this publicly. But if you don't do this, right, if you don't do this thing that we're asking you to do, if you don't bend on your principles, if you don't give into your principles, well, it doesn't matter because we're going to record or we're going to use, which is interesting about the episode because it actually deals with deepfake technology. The season ending also deals with deepfake technology too. So it's like, very much ahead of its time in many ways, right? Saying, well, even if you don't say it while you're alive, you will say it posthumously because we'll just have a deepfake where you are saying it. And yeah, people will question it because they'll know this technology exists. And so they'll say, is this real, is authentic or not? Hard to say because it's just a video instead of being like, alive where people are seeing it. And so I guess the moral question that comes from that is, if that is the decision that you're given, wouldn't it be better to give in and save other people, right? To save that alien, to be able to save your friends, right? And I would say that I think Sheridan, in many ways, is acting in the right because he is refusing to give in, not only on the principles that he believes in, but he's also refusing to give in on the principles of objective moral truth, right? Because he says it is not worth compromising, not even just his character. It is not worth betraying the actual truth, even if the intention is good. This goes back into Christian ethics, right? So Christian ethics is the understanding that the end, the intention, does not justify the means. Meaning that because I'm desiring a good result, does not then mean I can do whatever I have to get to that result. There is objective moral truth that exists, and therefore there are things that if I do them, they are always bad to do, even if my intention is good. Now, could things be less good, less evil, more evil because of consequences, circumstances, things like that? Absolutely, right? Someone robs a bank to feed their family versus someone robs a bank because they like money. Okay, both are bad because both are stealing, but one is clearly worse than the other because one is doing it for a good reason, whereas the other is not doing it for a good reason at all. So I actually think that Sheridan is very much in the right in his refusal to give in to the pressure, even though he also puts in danger, theoretically, some of the other people, right? He's not protecting those other people. Now, are there times when we have to... This is where this principle within Catholic moral theology comes into play, where we have to do something that objectively is not good in order to provide something greater. Again, basically, it seems like I'm saying that the ends could potentially justify the means in a certain way. This is where we have to recognize how objective law works, okay? So one of the greatest examples of this is the cases of self-defense, right? So what law does murder, killing violate? Thou shalt not kill, right? Commandments, thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not murder is how we typically understand that. But thou shalt not kill is the commandment. The problem is sometimes we forget that each commandment has two aspects. So there is a positive precept and a negative precept to every law. For instance, thou shalt not kill, that on the surface is the negative precept. Because a negative precept simply is one that tells you you can't do this, you can't do that. All right? So the negative precept there is what? You shall not kill. You can't kill. But every precept, every law has a positive one too. So what's the positive precept for the fifth commandment? If the negative is thou shalt not kill, what's the positive? Thou shalt what? Preserve life. And so that's why in a case of self-defense, your object, right, not your goal, but the object, what you are doing is what? Preserving life in the case of self-defense, which is why that is morally justifiable. If in the case of self-defense, it might happen to take the life of another person, right? Because you are acting according to the positive precept of that law, not the negative. Now, again, it can get complicated, obviously, because let's say you're defending yourself, but then you have a place where you could preserve the life of the person, of the aggressor. The example I like to give sometimes in my classes, let's say someone breaks into your home, and let's say you disarm the person and you have them in a secure place. And then at that point, you choose to execute them. Some states and some laws would say that's okay. They're in your house. You can basically do almost anything. Morally, though, we would say no. If you have them in control at that point, you cannot then at that point execute them if they're no longer an active threat to you, right? And I know there might be some that might disagree with that, but that's coming at it from a Christian moral lens. So again, there are restrictions to that. So it doesn't just mean, oh, if someone attacks me, I can just go ahead and kill them. If someone hits me across the face, I can use lethal force. No. Right? If we are acting out of preservation of life, that positive precept, that is when we can do it. So there is an argument that can be made that in the case of Sheridan, right, when he is acting this way, could he potentially do some things or make decisions acting towards a positive precept of law that might actually go against maybe some of the core understandings he has of those negative precepts of not betraying truth, for instance? That is, again, something that you could potentially have a moral choice made there. Potentially. But that is, I think, a really good episode, Intersections in Real Time. I will say the ending is a bit confusing because the ending is meant to leave you, I guess it's meant to leave you in a state of confusion. You're like, wait a minute. Was this alien in on it the whole time? Is this alien just a figment of your imagination? Basically, what happens is Sheridan is brought to another room and a new interrogator is brought in. Right? He's going on thinking he's about to die. And instead of dying, instead, he's brought to a new room, a new interrogator. So it's continuing to go on and on and on. And then the executioner that was waiting in the room where he thought he was going to die initially unmasks himself and is actually the alien he saw earlier that he thought had died because of him. That had died from the, had been tortured before. And the alien like gives a smile and wink. And it was confusing for me because I'm like, wait, is this all in his head? Is that alien actually in on it? Is this a mental psychological thing going on? And I guess that maybe that's the intention of that episode, right? Is to basically put you in the state of where Sheridan is now in, which is that state of what's real, what is real anymore. So that was definitely a good one. My favorite episode, other than that one, probably is the second to last one. I think Rising Star is a perfect end to this series. Let me say that again. Rising Star, episode 21 of season 4, is a perfect end to its series, okay? As I said, Sheridan faces the consequences of his actions against Clark and Earth Force. Marcus makes the ultimate sacrifice. Delenn organizes various races into a history-making alliance. Everything is getting wrapped up very, very nicely in this episode, okay? And the way it ends with the line at the end is a perfect season series ender. But there's more. There's still an episode after. So one of my least favorite episodes that has elements I do like, but it's a very weird season finale, is 22, the deconstruction of falling stars. Because what this then does, as it says, reveals the effect Babylon 5 will have on the universe for up to 1 million years into the future. So it's a bunch of video. It's supposed to be like videos that have been, that are going and being reviewed essentially. And the videos are meant to show, here's the effects of everything that's happened on Babylon 5 with the establishment of this new alliance of the different alien races with Earth, with Sheridan being the president of this group, and the impacts after the fact. So some of those sequences are really cool. One of my favorites is when there are these two historians on this show, which is interesting too, because it's almost a precursor to live streamed classes. Because they even say, oh, we've got 500,000 people who are waiting to hear our discussion. It's like, oh man, way ahead of its time in that way too, right? And so what's cool though is that in that discussion, you have these two historians who are clearly flawed in their logic and thinking. And then when they're finally faced with the reality, right, where Delenn shows up at the end and she's very, very old at this point, right? And all of a sudden they're like, oh, we were saying all these things and now she's just shown us that we're wrong. That was cool. Now, again, it's weird because you're like, wait a minute, she just shows up for this random stream. Where'd she come from? Was she planning on this? It's kind of weird in that way. The implications are good because it's basically showing these two guys. It was also in the same episode, there's a great back and forth that is very critical of news media, because I think it was the first sequence they show in the aftermath of this is three people on like a CNN type talk show where it's them like debating with each other. There's just like this one hot-headed guy, right, who is being very critical, and there's other two more even-keeled persons, one on Mars, the other, on Earth. And I thought that was interesting, right? I thought, again, that sequence was interesting. But it's weird to be the last episode. That's why I didn't like it overall. Because I was like, wait, that's the last episode of the season? Especially after 21. Because when Rising Star is such a good end, not just to the season, but to the series, for you to have not only another episode, but then another season after the fact, you're like, wait a minute. What the heck is going on here? So I have started season 5, and I definitely have some problems. Because I don't feel like this season is needed. I think that the second last episode of season 4 is a perfect wrap-up to the entire series. And there was not a need for a follow-up episode. That was weird. If anything, that episode would have made more sense as the first episode of season 5. That I think would have worked better than to instead have it in season, and instead to have that in season 4. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Anyway, overall, enjoyed season 4, though, of Babylon 5. I thought the beginning of the season was very good with the Shadow War. Middle gets a little boring, drags a little bit. And then the ending, I think, of the season, the last few episodes, very, very good. Once the war to liberate Mars and obviously the previous colony to Mars and eventually to do Earth. I thought that was really good. Anyway. Before we wrap things up, let's see what y'all got to say about Babylon 5. All right, let's see. Steven, thank you for tagging, saying, good morning, my friend. Any big plans this summer? What show do you recommend on Netflix or in general to watch? Babylon 5 would be one, absolutely, to recommend at this point in time. Let's see. Mr. Wink says, it's okay to stop here. No one will think less of you for skipping season 5. That's what I've heard. And my wife is a big fan of Babylon 5 too, and she says that she just gave up. She got maybe halfway through season 5, and then she was like, yeah, I just stopped watching it because it's just it's not good. Dragon Brick says, the last dinner celebration was how season 4 ended during original airing. Not sure if it is like that on DVD set or streaming. Last dinner celebration was how season 4 ended. So all I can tell you is on the Blu-ray series, the new Blu-ray series, the complete series that is now out. It came out end of last year. So for the first time on Blu-ray. By the way, what I will say is I don't think it is worth buying this on Blu-ray if you can find it on DVD. Now, that's heresy usually, right? That's usually heresy in any person's physical media conversations because Blu-ray is usually superior. The problem with Babylon 5 is because of how it was shot on television and because of how the transfers are done, this really does not, in my opinion, have a huge quality advantage because it's going to always be limited to what the original show was put onto. And I think the original show might have been put on tape. I could be wrong on that, but this, from what I can see, is not a digital scan of original film reels in any way. So whatever the cheapest version of the show you can find is, honestly, for as far as visual quality is concerned, yeah, you get some upgrade for sure with Blu-ray, but it's marginal, I would say. But in this series, the last episode is Deconstruction. Now, according to Wikipedia, episode 21, Rising Star, the second to last episode, aired October 20th, 1997. The Deconstruction of Falling Stars, that last episode, aired October 27th, 1997. So It was in the original run, and it came out the week after that episode that I think would have been the perfect ending to the series and to the season. So I don't know where you were seeing that. Let's see. Forever Sci-Fi says, maybe the Earthworth guys were just racist and didn't think Sheridan could tell one Drazi from another. Maybe. Kigan Rumsky asked, Jakar or Londo? Oh, man. Jakar. Oh, yeah. I don't even know why I had to think about that. Londo is funny for sure. I like Londo, the actor that plays Londo. Jakar is my absolute favorite, though. Love Jakar. My wife loves Jakar as well. And I appreciate, I mentioned before last night, I think, on the stream, that the not just his acting, but the makeup team as well. Just he always looks fantastic. But yeah, the character of Jakar is one of my favorites because he has one of the most interesting dynamics. A criticism I have, though, of Jakar, and this is a criticism of the writing, the relationship between Londo and Jakar is wrapped up too neatly. And what I mean by that is you see in the beginning, right, that they have this, clearly they don't like each other. Their races have had issues in the past, but there's friendliness between them, right? And then Londo becomes this dictatorial person working for the Shadows. The entire, Jakar and his entire race are enslaved and treated so poorly. Oh my gosh, right? By Londo and his people. And then there is that tension that exists then between them. And I feel like that tension is dissipated very quickly. Like, it's one thing for Londo and Jakar to agree to work together to try to back Sheridan, to try to give help to him and to his forces by signing a joint declaration. Mine must be on a different page, Jakar says. Again, great line from Jakar. But then immediately after that, it's like, oh, back to normal. It's like, no, that's not how that would work. And apparently season 5 deals more with their relationship, but it felt very weird. Again, it felt like the second last episode of season 4 was a wrap up to the entire series. So that's why the last episode makes very little sense. And then also the wrapping up of that relationship, or at least the conclusion of that relationship, also doesn't make a lot of sense either. Let's see. Heartbreak Rage Tag say the answer to Jakar or Londo is, of course, Veer. Veer is great, for sure. He is the glue that holds them together. Heartbreak Rage says, the scene of Veer looking up, smiling, doing the hand wave just gives me chills. Yeah. Anyway, those are my thoughts on that. So we have talked about Acolyte episode 3. Oh gosh, so bad. And we've talked about a much better show in Babylon 5 season 4. I've started season 5. Once I finish season 5, I'll give my thoughts on that probably during one of these Saturday streams. Sorry, one of these Wednesday morning streams. But that's going to be it for me, everybody. I'm sure a bunch of y'all have already headed over to the Geeks and Gamers daily stream. Please go ahead and check them out if you have not done so already. I'm sure they'll be talking about Acolyte thoughts and numbers as well. And if you like the stream, smash that like button, light up the fire button, obviously smash the rumble button as well, wherever it is that you're watching. Please make sure to show your support. If you're watching this after the fact, please leave a comment with your own thoughts as well. Hopefully I've answered and addressed any comments, especially about Babylon 5. I know that there was some interest in that series, especially last year. So let me know in the comments if there's other things, or if you have answers to some of the points I made. That would also be a good thing to see. But anyway, with all of those things being said, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. I will see you all on Friday for Friday Night Tights. I might be on a little late because there is at my son's school a Father's Day event. Of course, I'm going to go to that. That gets priority. And I'll try and jump on Friday Night Tights as soon as that is over and I can get back. And if not, then I will see y'all on Saturday for the Salty Saturday podcast, where we'll talk more, even more, about this terrible show that is The Acolyte. Anyway, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day. A blessed Wednesday. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Patreon, Subscribe Star, Locals, and YouTube members who are at the Chosen of Valhalla level. Starting off with my Patreon supporters, Father Luca Illick, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, which is Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name. To my Subscribe Star Chosen members, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, and also the K-Man, check him out at xtheboundaries.co, and a shout out also to my one Chosen of Valhalla YouTube member, Mr. Roy. Thank you again for being so much of a huge supporter of the channel. And to every one of my Chosen members, if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, or if you want access to things like giveaways of Blu-rays, 4Ks, etc., and access to an exclusive podcast bonus material for members, check out the links in the video description below for all of those details. You guys are amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed month of the Sacred Heart, and as always, God bless.